Philadelphia's district attorney is getting national attention in the fight against wrongful convictions. More wrongfully incarcerated people were exonerated of murder in Philadelphia County last year than anywhere else in America. Since taking office in 2018, DA Larry Krasner has exonerated 15 people. Jericka Duncan first spoke to Krasner more than a year ago and checked in over the summer to hear about reforming his office's culture. She's also caught up with one of those 15 exonerated people, Terrance Lewis. Jericka, good morning.
Good morning. To understand Terrance Lewis's story, you have to go back to 1999. He was 20 years old and found guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison. Well, last year, Philadelphia prosecutors dropped those charges. It's now been a year since Terrance Lewis was released.
At that moment, that was sheer, genuine joy.
In May of 2019, after more than 2 decades behind bars, 40-year-old Terrance Lewis walked out of a Pennsylvania prison a free man.
Coming from the box of despair, where I was being warehoused, to be able to feel the breeze on that side of the wall and to get a genuine hug, it's surreal.
I was convicted of...
That reality was just starting to set in when we first met Lewis last year, 87 days after his release.
Although I'm grateful, it's definitely been difficult because I have been enslaved, mentally as well as physically.
It's been over a year since you were released from prison. How do you feel?
I would be remiss to say that, life has been a cakewalk. Initially, it felt like I was leaving one prison to come home to another prison.
In 1999, Lewis was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Prosecutors built their case around the testimony of one eyewitness, a drug addict.
I proved my innocence, unequivocally speaking. Factually speaking.
It wasn't until 21 years later and after the DA's office expressed, quote, really grave concerns about whether Lewis was guilty that a judge threw out his conviction and ordered Lewis's freedom.
I got the weights and I just zone out and think about freedom.
He sued the city of Philadelphia. That's because exonerees are not automatically entitled to compensation in Pennsylvania. Lewis alleged that police practices, including coercion, suppression of exculpatory evidence, and fabrication of evidence, violated his constitutional rights. This past June, the city and Lewis reached a settlement for $6.25 million.
I did 21.5 years for a crime that I did not commit. No money in the world can amount to what I felt inside.
He says he's using some of that money to fight for justice, launching the Terrance Lewis Liberation Foundation.
It's going to be our first presentation.
A nonprofit partnering with UPenn students to investigate claims of wrongful convictions.
He has a sincere belief that there are innocent people sitting in jail now, which is surely true.
Lewis was inspired by Philadelphia's District Attorney Larry Krasner. His conviction integrity unit helped restore Lewis's freedom, but Krasner made it clear from day one he wanted to take on the entire system. In his first week in office in 2018, he fired 31 employees.
I did not enjoy it, but it was necessary to do, especially as I see these exonerations happen, and guess whose names just keep coming up for having been involved in convictions of innocent people.
The people you let go.
Yep. That story will be developing. Stay tuned. I can tell you a lot of what has done since I said stay tuned has been in the nature of education. We put a ton of time into educating the prosecutors about things like the obligation to turn over information that helps the defense.
Do you feel you've done an effective job at changing that culture?
I feel we have, although it's a struggle, and we've had the opportunity to become credible within the system to people who may have had misconceptions about what we were trying to do. We are just as focused on going after serious gun violence as we are focused on making sure innocent people do not sit in jail.
Out of a dozen shootings.
But gun violence has spiked in Philadelphia. Since last year, homicides have increased about 40%. How do you convince people that you are just as serious about focusing on homicide at a time where Philadelphia is facing some of the worst violent crime in over a decade?
Let's be fair about this. Almost every big city in the United States is in the same position.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's no question that it's related to the pandemic. For the first time in probably close to 100 years, we have the Philadelphia court system shut down for months. You have changes in policing so that police are making decisions not even to arrest for certain offenses. When you have all of that going on, you have a perfect storm.
In spite of that storm, there is hope, says Terrance Lewis, that no matter how long it takes, justice is possible.
I'm a believer from amongst the believers in regards to reform and eradicating the racial disparities and inequalities. I'm very hopeful that change, in fact, is going to come.
The Philadelphia Police Department declined to comment on Lewis's case. As you can hear and tell, that Lewis is really focused right now on his foundation and helping other people like himself. Tony?
Jericka, it's a powerful story. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we were talking about Larry Krasner here at the table, Jericka.
Yeah.
Very, very touched, very moved, very thankful that he's taken the position that he has. Is he getting a lot of support?
He is getting support from those who support the ideas that he's talking about, and I think it's still considered radical, maybe not in Philadelphia, but when you look across the country in terms of what he had to say, even when I asked him about, you know, defunding the police and that idea, and him wanting to focus more on not just putting people behind bars, but really understanding why they're there to begin with, and looking at other ways that we can use money to fund schools, to fund programs that will keep people from behind bars.
And listen, the story of Terrance Lewis is a classic example, and why this is so important. I was worried about him because he said he goes from the box of despair to almost going into another prison. He seems to be doing okay, is he? I mean, clearly, he has a, you know, money isn't going to make the difference for what was taken from him. But I sure am glad he got some money.
Yeah.